we have started. So welcome everybody. If you can't hear us, then please access the Q&A down the bottom of your Zoom screen and let us know. I have here, in case you don't recognise him, David Bush.
We decided beforehand that I was going to wear a sign that said, "I'm not Trudy."
Well, just because we look alike,
Yeah.
So we thought it best to give ourselves labels. So thank you very much for joining us. This webinar came about because last week the government acknowledged, well, formally, that there was a need to utilise tools to help stop the spread of COVID, particularly because our front line is still being bypassed. The workers at the quarantine facilities and isolation facilities are still coming into contact and have a little bit of danger that they're going to spread it throughout the community. In response to the changes that the government made in Auckland, the church is also recommending that masks are used for church services. And this is primarily because we have people that are potentially within enclosed areas, and we are going to be singing or responding loudly within the services. Sorry, these are new masks, they're a little bit big, closing off my eyelids. And that the church needs to take a stance to help look after people. And we've had a bit of pushback along the lines of, why does Auckland have to wear masks at church, particularly because it's not mandated for shops or hospitals or doctors or retirement villages. And also we need to consider how far is too far, particularly when we're at alert level 1.
So for us, as Trudy was saying, it was a question about the risk of transmission, and certainly the government has taken the steps of making mask wearing compulsory on flights and on public transport in Auckland. And the reason for that is that masks are actually particularly effective in preventing transmission of the virus. And the other part of it is, of course, the virus, you don't know that it's there until somebody has contracted it. And it seemed to us that the responsible thing to do was to think about the sort of setting that a congregation is on a Sunday morning, or when a congregation gathers. Certainly both in New Zealand and overseas, there have been significant outbreaks of the virus associated with churches and with church activity. And that is because, as Trudy was saying, when we sing, when we respond, it's more likely that that the virus, if it is present in somebody in the congregation, it's more likely that it will be spread.
And so obviously I come at this from a health and safety perspective, and with any hazard, you assess the risk. What is the risk that we, or our activity creates, or what is the activity that we undertake whereby we encounter the risk? And how do we control the risk during those activities? It's not just, it's not just during the activity, but also before and after the activity. How do we control the entire risk? And the risk that face masks are being introduced for is the droplets that are created. And it comes down to, what level of risk do you accept? That we have the ability to control the risk to quite a large degree with the use of face masks and hygiene, but what level of risk do you accept? Now, leading into Christmas is particularly hard. We've had queries from one minister who has a fundraising concert coming up and carol services coming up, and it's huge interactions with the community. So whereas the congregation may be able to wear masks, how do you control the community and the church environment when they've been invited in, and particularly around fundraising events around Christmas time? And and it's not looking just at church services, but all of the activities that happen within the church. One thing that particularly sticks in my mind is a conversation with the minister from Taupo, where she was quite aware of having her parishioners all singing in her direction. So the chances of her, having the same ability to spread her droplets back into the congregation was quite substantially less than what the congregation was doing in response to her, because they're all facing in her direction. And it's just those considerations of the other people in the room, and how would we look after them? How would you look after your preacher, and how would your worship leader then look after everybody else as well? And they're big considerations. They're not little by any means. And it's the risk of all the people before, during, and after our activities.
And I think we're saying this is a recommendation. It's not a mandate like it is on the planes and public transport. And so it is about ensuring that we are following best practice as much as we can. So that's hand hygiene. It's making certain that people don't attend when they're unwell. It's all of those things that help to ensure that the virus is not spread. And certainly there may be special circumstances for some congregations or some people that actually means that locally you'll need to modify what you do.
And one email that we had from Mary Cagle, I think, is quite relevant as well, and this is partly why we dragged in David. Mary says this is a deeply pastoral matter and one that we cannot take too seriously. And that really is from quite a key perspective, the core of all of this. How do we look after each other? So in response to events where we've got fundraising events and the carol services and things, I think that there is a little bit that we can do. We can offer masks for the community that are coming to our events, and we can lead by example ourselves by wearing them. The models that we've got on today, I just whipped them up yesterday because somebody said, how do we look after our hearing impaired people? And the idea is that you can see the lips moving while somebody's talking. Now these ones are too big, which is why we're having difficulty with them.
Yes, we are.
But they're the first trial. That they were relatively easy to make. They're just too big. But we can fix that in the next go around. But those are some of the things that we can do. Now, I've done just a little bit of research. You can get a box of 50 single-use masks. These ones from Office Max were $34 for a box of 50, which means that you're looking at about 60 cents a mask. That's reasonable. You could even offer them as a fundraiser for 50 cents or $1 or a gold coin donation. And I don't think community people would be that adverse to going, well, it's not that much and everybody else is doing it, let's give it a go. Alternately, the masks that we put on the website, or the pattern, these ones are solid cloth, very similar to this, but they fit better. They're relatively easy to make, and it's just whatever material you got lying around that's light and cotton is very easy to manage. So the barrier of going they're costly or they're difficult, or the ones that are too big are too difficult, but there's very little barrier to wearing the mask. You could go quite fashionable, so long as they fit nicely. And making them available to people in the community would probably help build that habit in people as well. So again, the risk that we're looking at is the droplets. So the louder you talk, the louder you sing, the more droplets you create and the further they are transmitted. And one of the things that we've had from one of the pushbacks that we've had from Auckland is, what about the cup of tea and the socialising after church? And the answer to that is, there's by far less droplets in that activity than there are in singing and talking loudly. So I would say, have your cup of tea, socialise, use all the care and the hygiene that we've been practicing to date to do things right. But certainly we're alert level 1.
And certainly we're aware that currently New Zealand is serving biscuits and tea and coffee on flights. So even though people are wearing their masks on the plane, they have to take them off to eat their bicky and drink their tea or coffee. So yeah, I don't think there's a problem with refreshment, with refreshments afterwards.
Yeah, because ideally you're not going to be yelling at each other with your food in your mouth or your drink in your mouth. And it becomes one-on-one conversations rather than one to many or many to many, as the case may be. Sorry, I just saw a question flick up. It was quite cheeky, so I'm assuming it's Robert Haven Pratt.
I think Robert wiped our masks, I think.
Yes.
We said we need to get our lip syncing sorted.
Oh no, that would be the hand that's up our back going like this. So another reason why I investigated these masks, as I said, a minister asked a question about how we're inclusive with hearing impaired people when we're wearing face masks. So I thought I'd go to a main source, and I asked the consultant for the United Methodist Committee on Deaf and Hard of Hearing Ministries, and said, how do they manage with face masks? And he responded that they use a combination of methods. They will wear, deaf will wear cloth masks, but when signing, they'll remove their mask for expressing only, and they'll ensure social distancing. So I'm assuming that actually, it doesn't matter whether you're deaf or hearing impaired. If you've got social distancing and masks, or you're outside and you've got social distancing, the masks become less of an issue. And again, it's all around the droplet control of it all. So it's only the person who would be doing the signing who removes their mask, and everybody else obviously keeps their social distance. And it will work in all deaf or hard of hearing situations. One phrase that Tom came up with that I particularly like is, it requires the hearing people be sensitive to this choreography of grace in communication, which I particularly like because I think it's a very graceful way of speaking when you've got your hands involved in there as well. And I love watching it. I just wish I could understand it myself.
I think that's a good point, Trudy, that it could be that in some circumstances that the worship leader does actually need to take their mask off, and they are effectively protected by other people wearing their masks.
Yeah.
Because there's no question that even though you and I are wearing these fancy masks with a visual bit, it's actually quite different if I put it down like that and you can see my whole face rather than just a small part of it. So, yeah, I think that we're recommending this as a means, really to ensure that we're keeping ourselves safe, our people safe, our communities safe. But we can use common sense in the way that we implement it.
Yeah.
And I think the comment of the minister, the worship leader, was basically saying, no, the 60 or 70 people looking at me, I'm the person potentially most at risk. In that sense, a worship leader, one person to many, is a much less risky situation.
And yeah, I've got to say that these masks are not particularly comfortable. They're quite hot, and I assume any mask would be. But again, this is all around the activity that we're undertaking. I'm only going to be wearing this mask for as long as we're doing the webinar. If you've never worn a mask before, then you could practice at home, maybe while you're watching the TV. I do know that one of the volunteers here was going on a flight, and she spent some time wearing a mask a few nights beforehand just to get herself in the habit. So Nicola says, for a congregation with a variety of pastoral needs, immune compromised, hearing impaired, autism, there is no one answer. It is important to know your congregation and respond as appropriate.
Yeah.
And that masks, even with clear plastic, is really difficult for many. And absolutely, yes. Even though there's a vaccine on the horizon, they're still saying that it will be a while before New Zealand has the opportunity to get that vaccine. So we have the potential of living in a mask-wearing society for potentially still another 12 months, and possibly even longer after that. We need to start thinking now about how we're going to do that.
Yeah, I think those comments that Nicola made it's really very helpful, because every congregation will have special circumstances or needs, and yeah, I think that it is a matter of being aware. So if you are aware of a number of immune compromised people there, then I think that does make the wearing of masks and other possible measures, that actually makes it more critical. Yeah, I would certainly endorse that.
And I think it's true, as Nicola says, that you need to know your audience, that you need to come up with solutions that fit the people involved. And we have there's a huge variety of things that we can do, and you pick and choose through the entirety, not just the face masks.
I like the comment that Robert Hagen-Pretz just put up, that in Nelson at the CCNZ conference, the speaker was wearing a mask emblazoned, "I used to be ugly." I don't know what this does for me. They're probably going to retire me, I think, for wearing this.
Oh well, you already had a foot out the door, haven't you? Now, one of the other things that people may have tried already is to try and sing in a mask. I'm not going to do it. I told David he had to, but I don't think he's going to do it either. So long as you're not going into full operatic mode of trying to open your mouth as wide as possible, it is entirely possible to make loud noises in a mask, and certainly easy enough to sing.
I'm not going to demonstrate, because I don't want everybody to automatically leave the webinar because of it. But yeah, certainly it is possible to sing in masks. I know that the congregation where I worship, for a few weeks when we were coming out of lockdown, we made a commitment to sing softly, and so to limit the possibility of droplets being spread, and that certainly is another way of responding. The other thing that somebody, I think, said, why Auckland, why not the rest of New Zealand? And it could well be that I think we are really saying to our Methodist people, we need to be careful. We need to take steps that will limit the possibility of spread of the virus.
And Auckland is lucky, or unlucky as the case may be. They are the largest city. They have the largest amounts of isolation and quarantine facilities, and that's where the risk is always going to lie. It's always going to lie with having more people with more access to catching the virus. And it's just a simple case of numbers. Auckland's bigger, it's got more people, and it's got more level of risk in it. I do believe, though, that as the risk grows, or if it grows elsewhere throughout the country, then the government's going to mandate masks there as well. It's a natural progression.
So a couple more questions. One of them will be a recommendation coming from the church to encourage parishes or people to wear masks. As I've found, most of my members will not just wear them if there's no instruction. We have sent a message recommending, but it's certainly, it's not compulsory. But there is a strong recommendation, and as Trudy said, it's possible to get a box or boxes of masks to have them available for people that want to wear them. Another question, do we need to use mask and distancing or choose what suits your situation? I think if we're wearing masks, then distancing does become less of an issue, and certainly there are some of our churches that are physically quite big, and in that sense it may be possible to distance, and masks become less critical. That really goes back to looking at each situation and what works best.
And that relates to risk as well. If your people are closer together, then obviously we would recommend wearing masks, but it has to suit your situation. If they're further apart, or if they've got further challenges to wearing masks, like breathing issues or other impairments that will stop them wearing masks for a length of time, then select distancing. And that's partly why it's a recommendation to do it, and to seriously consider how you manage the risk of the droplet spread.
And another comment and question from Julie Adamson. At my doctor's surgery the other day, the nurse commented that it was probably about time that people used masks when coming into the surgery, or that very unwell people waited separately to be seen for everyone's health. Perhaps when COVID is under control, it will be considered appropriate and safe to still continue with some measures such as mask wearing. Do you think this is something the Methodist Church New Zealand might look at long term? I certainly think that for the future, perhaps until we unfortunately forget about this experience, that there hopefully will be a couple of things that will happen. Firstly, that people who are unwell will actually self-isolate, will stay at home to work, will avoid coming to worship or going to their cafe or club. And I would hope that does become part of normal life. Like the number of people that have had colds this year has been significantly less than we would normally have. And the flu cases in New Zealand this year has almost been non-existent. So there is real value in, when we're unwell, self-isolating. And likewise, I think mask wearing in situations where perhaps we do have a little bit of a sniffle, but we're still feeling pretty good. I think to wear a mask in that situation is about self-protection. Certainly in some parts of the world, wearing masks is a much more regular thing. I somehow don't think that will happen in New Zealand. I think it is about managing ourselves when we're less than well.
I think one thing that the lockdown has done for us, though, is it's forced us into other ways of working, other ways of delivering service, other ways of delivering worship, and into the future it will give us much more of a range of options, rather than coming to work when we've got a little niggle, or coming to church when we've got a little niggle that perhaps we should stay home with.
So a couple more comments and questions. Peter Taylor's asking, for some perhaps oversensitive people, wearing masks can lead to an increase of psychological stress. How does this affect the need to wear them? Yep, I think that is a good point. That there is a sense, though, I think it is important to remind ourselves in New Zealand that the threat is real. certainly as I've in recent weeks have travelled to Auckland for conference and then was in Wellington last week, it seems to a greater or lesser extent that we're just going about our normal activities as if nothing's going on, and there is a risk in that. We're being protected by the dramatic measures at our borders in quarantine, but there is significant risk if the virus escapes into the community.
Yeah.
So to some extent, I agree, it does perhaps increase stress for some people, but for many of us, I think it is a reminder that COVID-19 is not a laughing matter, it's something to be treated very seriously.
I think the response to that as well is that absolutely, wearing masks will affect everybody. The concept of change is scary. And one of the easiest ways to help people out is to normalise the event. That the more we wear masks, the more it becomes normal and the less stressful it becomes. If it is a stressful event, you build up to it slowly, you discuss it, you make it open and easy for people to achieve the outcome. Or you offer alternates, and alternates are social distancing, obviously, physical distancing, alternate means of delivery of program perhaps. But that needs to be balanced with the isolation that comes from the distancing side of things as well. And this is not an easy thing. This is why we need to start thinking about it now and not when it gets forced on us by a government mandate.
And a comment and question from Robin Gooch: my difficulty is the church is asking us to be out of step with the rest of the population. If the government mandates masks, then everyone does. But to be the only ones feels very awkward. We're at level 1, not level 2 and 3 or 4. I'm concerned that people will vote with their feet and stay away because the worship experience is just too restrictive and confining. I would hope that is not true. I am aware that there are some people who are not attending worship because they are uncertain about whether it's safe. So I think it does have the capacity to cut both ways. And it is a recommendation. I think, I think the other comment I would have about that, particularly in the United States, leading up to the recent elections, one of the candidates, the unsuccessful one, made a big thing about not wearing masks, and it really became, for some people, a demonstration of freedom of expression to not wear a mask. I would hope that we might see it as an expression of freedom of expression to wear a mask, because that is a sign that we are willing to give up a little bit of perhaps what we might have normally thought was part of the way we might live, so that we might protect others and also protect ourselves. But I acknowledge that we certainly wouldn't want to see people staying home because they were being asked to wear a mask, but neither would we want them to stay at home because the rest of the congregation is not wearing a mask.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to, again, having that conversation. What level of risk are the congregation willing to accept? It's okay to say, I accept this for me, but I have absolutely no rights to say I accept it for David or I accept it for anybody else. And that's it. That's the conversation. To normalise it. So if the majority of people say, let's give it a try, or let's do it, or let's not do it, that's the acceptance level. That's in the parish, and I guess that's what you go with. But again, you try all of the tools that are available.
Another comment from Nicola Grundy, and I think that the more we can normalise things like staying at home if you're unwell is really important for the future and for planning. And there's more comment, I'll read it in a moment, but I think that's really true. And many of our congregations now have the capacity to do worship by Zoom. And so maybe particularly in the winter when people are more susceptible to illnesses, that could become part of our life in the future, that we have an online worship that goes in parallel with our in-person worship. Nicola's saying it's useful when sending out material to focus on these issues as a guideline rather than recommendations or instruction. There are many different issues relating to mask wearing and other things we could be doing. We need to be aware of the possibilities and react as appropriate for our own situation. And then from Basilu, in a congregation where the majority are old people, if the mask does become an issue in breathing, what could be some of the options if they still choose to attend the service? I have limited experience in wearing masks, but my impression is that their main disadvantage is they become quite hot, that it is still possible to breathe. But yeah, I can imagine that Auckland in January and February, when it's hot and humid, that it would be more the humidity rather than the breathing that might be an issue.
But some of the things they can do is, if everyone else is wearing a mask, then the people that have the breathing difficulties are less at risk. They're less likely to be the ones that have the health and well-being to be able to spread droplets to a greater degree. Again, have them not wear the mask. If it appears breathing that fails all points of wearing a mask, we're not going to kill somebody by forcing a mask on them when they can't breathe with it. So have them hum, sing quietly, speak quietly while they're in service, and treat them like a normal person, because they are. We're all different. We can't all achieve the same level.
Another comment from Robert Hagan Pratt. People only wear masks at Trinity, that's Trinity, Newtown and Wellington, if they're sneezing, hay fever, and also practice social distancing. And yeah, I think that certainly social distancing is important, and as we talked about before, that wearing a mask, and particularly like hay fever is not something you're going to catch off somebody else. It's and so it's perfectly safe to go out in public and meet with others when you've got hay fever. The trouble is when you sneeze, people can't tell the difference between that and some infectious reason. So that is very sensible.
Now, Nicola says disadvantages she's aware of are those who wear hearing aids. They need to remove hearing aids. This is the style of mask that we created for the sewing bee in the connectional office. Before we did this, I had them trialed. So somebody with hearing aids and glasses, I had them try this. One of the issues that they had with other types of masks is that the elastic wasn't long enough. It was pulling on their ears. So when you've got glasses, hearing aids, and a mask all wrapped around your ears and the mask is too small, you will have difficulty. So one of the things about hearing aids is loosen up the elastic, have longer elastic so that it's not pulling on your ears, and you should find that the problem is less severe than you might think. So I got the tick of approval from a hearing aid wearer for these masks. In addition, the glasses, when you wear glasses, if the glass sits on the outside of the mask, it creates enough distance so that you won't fog up your glasses. So that was feedback from the hearing aid glass wearing person who trialled these beforehand. And they are hot. I got to say that this is quite hot.
That's because Christchurch is such a warm place, though, isn't it, Trudy?
Well, that's right, yes. Yeah, that's the difficulties we have to put up with. But I only intend on wearing this for an hour. If the activity is worth doing, you will put up with the mask. If you want to travel to somewhere else on a plane, you will wear a mask,
Yeah.
and you will get over it because you want to travel. So is the activity worth it? I'd say that going to church is. It's not all day. Well, some people may, but you should be able to find time where you can be by yourself and swap out your mask and have a breather and then go back in again. And one of the other things, you may find it difficult to see people's facial expressions, that all things are important. I agree. When you're wearing a mask, it removes quite a large chunk of communication. We communicate with our faces, not just our voices. We'll need to work harder at it. Through all of these difficulties that this year has given us, we have to work harder at communication. Robert Hagen Pratt, behave yourself.
I need to put my glasses back on.
Oh, that's so you can tell us apart. Yeah, but through all of this, we have to work harder in all of our communication efforts. That's partly why I created this. It's like I can't sit here and talk to people about wearing a face mask if I'm not wearing one. And then I'm like, well, how do I communicate when I'm wearing a mask through a camera with limited expression and body communication that you would normally do? Hence why this attempt.
Yep.
And it's always going to be a challenge. We need to start working now on normalising it and being able to do it into the future. Julie asks, could we summarise some of the key points about masks that we mentioned today as a separate document? I think a summary of whys and hows would be very helpful. Yeah, we can do that, Julie. That's not a problem.
Yeah, in fact, I think that's important because we don't want people necessarily, as much as they might like looking at us, Trudy, to necessarily watch a 35-minute or 40-minute webinar. A couple of other questions. Peter Taylor asks, have folk found using masks affects microphone use? You're not certain about that. I note that a number of reporters on television have used masks without too much difficulty.
You will get a different sound quality. Like when David took his mask off earlier, there was a different sound quality to him talking. But as an example, David and I are doing this webinar over an iPad, which is on a music stand. If you can hear us, then that's really the sort of quality that you'll get with a mask and a microphone. Yeah. So they will stop droplets. A mask will stop droplets, but it shouldn't stop sound waves. It will change them a little bit.
And Robin Googe has asked, when church is an optional activity, bothersome things do become a turn-off, and our congregations are small enough as it is. Yeah, I think that's part of the way, if we are going to be wearing masks, it's part of the way that we need to think about why we're doing it. And we're doing it really as it's a public health, public safety matter. We sincerely hope that what we're doing is actually, in a sense, not necessary. But imagine how we'd feel if New Zealand was locked down at Christmas because the virus spread through one of our congregations and then into the community. Yes, I agree, it is potentially bothersome, but certainly my understanding that's why the government is saying that confined spaces need to have a greater protection than we've had in the past. And perhaps earlier they were being too conservative when they were not mandating mask use. There's a sense where I think they're catching up. But no, we are saying it is a recommendation. We don't have any. We're not mandating that this must happen, but we certainly believe that it would be to our advantage and to the advantage of our people to be wearing masks.
And I think I may be hammering this point, but it comes back to having that discussion with your people. If you don't want to control droplets through the use of face masks, how else will you do it? And have people agree to those actions. That if they want to avoid face masks, then you have more physical distancing in church if you don't have it already. How do you take care of each other, and how do you take care of your minister? Face masks is the easy solution because it's visible. It shows everybody the level of care that you're taking. And we're not saying it's the only solution. There's a multitude of solutions that you might pick and choose a combination thereof to make it work. But again, it's coming back to what level of risk do you accept and how will you manage that risk? And conversation. It's not a one-person decision by any means.
I think I'm aware, Trudy, that in Taiwan, that Taiwan's probably had the most effective response to COVID-19 of any country in the world. It has a population, I think, about 4.5 times that of New Zealand, and they've had a much smaller number of cases and a very small number of deaths. My understanding is that mask wearing has been a very strong part of their response right from the very beginning. And yeah, it is a relatively small thing that we can do, which potentially has a large positive impact.
Just thinking a little bit more on Nicola's questions about the different types of people who may not want to wear masks. In researching this style of mask, the other thing I came across was face shields. They can either be, if you're wearing a set of glasses, they're attached to the glasses and they come down, or other ones that actually attach over your ears and the shield comes up. What that means is that it's not closed in around your face through this area here. They're not as effective, but they're still a means of creating a barrier for droplet control, which means that there's varying options. You could either go no mask, a face shield, have a mask. The advantage of a face shield is you can still see all your facial expressions as well. And so yeah, there are multitudes of options with varying control levels. Some are okay, some are good, some are really good. And it's a case of picking what works for you. Robert Hagen-Pratt talks about audio quality, about clipping a lapel mic through here instead of having a stand mic as a way to deal with quality issues through masks.
And Robin Googe is saying it is much, much harder to preach and communicate with a mask on. I agree. Hard to communicate warmth and smile. I have to say the mask with a clear plastic strip looks a bit creepy.
They certainly do.
Yeah. And I thought I was putting my best face forward, but yeah, I don't disagree with you, Robin. And I think that's what we were saying earlier, that maybe the worship leader does need to do so without wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Because that is one person projecting towards the many rather than the many projecting towards the one. And there's probably appropriate social distancing between the lectern or the pulpit and the front row of the congregation.
And even to join in whatever little way you could. Again, you may want to revert to a face shield.
And in fact, I was going to say, Trudy, that a lot of the congregations that I've been in, that people don't naturally sit in the front row anyway, so that probably does reduce the risk. So Robin, I'd say, yeah, from the worship leader perspective, it could well be that, you know, the best thing to do is to not wear a mask, that it doesn't allow people to see you and for you to project your voice and yourself as you normally would. They said, Peter, that's fantastic. Peter Taylor says, they sit in my front row.
Have you removed all the other chairs?
Oh, the choir sits there.
Awesome.
Okay, we're just coming up to 45 minutes, and I think that means that we are about to finish. So, are there any further questions or comments? We will, if you have got further questions and comments, we can leave this running for a while, although we will stop, but we can respond to your questions and comments in further communication that we send out.
So we'll follow up on Julie's suggestion that we document the whys and hows. A video of this will be put up on to the website, and as always, we will be available by phone or email. Okay, Nicola has said, I think when we talk about risk, we need to be aware and cognizant of the whole risk. It's not just about the droplets. When public health information is such that the church is recommending more than we need to do in community, it can be difficult. That's absolutely true. The whole risk is based on, obviously, virus spread. With the increase in the government requirements around face mask wearing, we need to take a step back and go, well, the government's suggesting further steps, and say, are there areas of risk or activities that we do ourselves where it could be an equivalent area or gathering such that the government's trying to control. So when you look at things like public transport, you can still have social distancing upon a bus, and yet they're recommending that you can still have social distancing, but less so on a plane, and they're recommending there as well. So the area where we as a church should be saying, have we got an area of risk that we can better control through the use of face masks? That's where we can do it, is in our church services and events. And in this situation, it's a little bit different when it comes to talking about risk, and that is the face masks. It was the use of face masks the government was increasing, and that's what we looked at from there.
I think too, the sort of comment that the government hasn't mandated something, that's true. But I also think there are some things where we as a church can provide what you might call a productive lead. So it's going a bit further than is being required of us, but we're doing it because, in a sense, because we care about one another and we care about our communities. We have flexibility in that it is not legally required of us, but we have that flexibility to respond with warmth and with grace to the people around us.
Well, David, would you like to say a few closing words for us, please?
Well, I want to thank the people that have been part of this, because this is a webinar. We don't actually get to see you, but I see that we have 22 participants. If you click on that, Greta, does that bring? Thank you for joining us. I trust that this has been a useful exercise. It's certainly given us some things to think about, and we will collate the responses from the questions and other things that you've asked. The reality is that this year of COVID has called from us all sorts of responses, and I have been immensely proud of the way that Methodist congregations of people have responded. I think we have, overall, we have responded incredibly well and incredibly wisely, and I'm absolutely certain that we will continue to do that. For myself, I'm coming towards the end of my time as General Secretary, and probably towards the end of my time of having to do this. It certainly has been a bit of a challenge at times, but it has been, it's been good to see the response and the responsiveness of our people. So we are all looking forward to 2021 being a year of new beginnings. However, I do trust that we don't lose some of the important lessons that we've learned during 2020 about caring for one another and keeping one another safe in so many ways. So thank you all. Thank you to Gria, who's been ensuring that we can see the questions and respond to them. And Trudy, thank you for these amazing masks. I'm due to go on a flight tomorrow. I don't know that I'll wear this. I might. It's the flowers. It's the flowers. Yeah. But thank you, and thank you for all your good work, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Ka kite.